All right. Welcome, everyone. Looks like we got a small crowd here, many less than RSVP'd. So my name is Scott. I'm excited to that some people are here that we're gonna talk about this topic tonight. It is 5:59 on my computer, so I am gonna get going in just about 1 minute. Um, I'm assuming everyone can hear me. I'm assuming my face is in a little box. You can see my slides. If for some reason something's not right, someone please send me a chat. Also, as I'm talking tonight, I mean this is just going to be me chatting. I'm going to go for about 30 minutes. But if anyone has any questions, I can certainly pause at any moment. Feel free to just put them in the chat box. I'll try to keep that open and keep an eye on it. So I actually see those. Um, and so yeah, feel free to fire questions away, and then afterwards I'll just hang out for a minute. Usually, if questions don't come in the first minute on the chat, um, they're not coming. So then I'll just close it up. This is also being recorded, and I believe will be emailed out as well as the slides. Um, if somebody's about to ask that. So my clock just turned to 6. I like to be prompt so we can get going. So this is what we're talking about tonight. Sort of these. This is framed as the study mistakes that students are making. So my name's Scott Lutostanski. I work for Gallon Education and State Street Education, but we do the same thing and we're the same people, which is we do executive function coaching with high school and college students and even some middle school students. And so we work virtually with kids all over the country. The cities we're in, we work in person. Certainly, I'm in Madison, Wisconsin. We work with a lot of kids there. Um, but when we do this coaching, kids come and work with us and they get into sort of our rhythm of how we work with students. They get a coach, they work for maybe a semester, maybe a year, and they're having these weekly meetings. And as we work with these students on the executive function skills, we also do a lot of work on the study skills. And so those things I'm talking about tonight are kind of coming from a couple places. They're coming from what's the research out there saying. I, in particular, like one resource that I would encourage people to look at if once this wraps up, if they're even interested in going deeper, and that's called learningscientist.org. I believe it's .org. You'll have to double check, but it's just some psychologists that literally just research learning and what it is and how to make it effective. And they have tons of blogs, research, resources, podcasts, the whole nine. So that's a great resource. Um, but as I'm talking tonight, I'm going to be talking about, okay, here's what's in the research. Here's the things we're just seeing from students. I'm going to be referencing high school students. I'm going to be referencing college students because we do work with both. Um, so that's kind of where all this is coming from. That's me. Um, so to kind of introduce this topic, I feel like in this role, I mean, I talk to hundreds of families a year, and I often hear some similar things. One from the parents is usually like, I don't think my kid knows how to study. I don't think they know what to do. I've heard a lot from students actually, even a couple times in the last 2 weeks, where students have said the exact same thing, which is like, when my teacher says go home and study for a test, I have no idea what to do. Um, and then I hear it from teachers. I hear like, yeah, I just don't think my students know how to get ready for a test. In fact, in with what I do, the two things I think I hear about the most, these kind of exactly what I just said, was studying and note taking. I hear it a lot for note taking too. Um, and so these are the two of the hot button issues. Tonight we're going to talk about studying. I should say, um, what we're talking about tonight, like we're talking about study mistakes. My goal tonight is not for people to come away from this and say, well, these things don't work, because any study strategy is better than no study strategy. Any study strategy, any work with information is going to put the student in a better place than where they started. What we're really after, and what I'm talking about tonight, and what I hope some of maybe people's takeaways from this are, is we're looking for how to make it more effective. How do I get more out of the time I'm spending? How do I um, learn the information faster, not have to work as hard? Maybe we're really looking for that. That's what I want to talk about tonight. So Um, on the flip side of that, when students are struggling in these areas, these are some of the things that we see and hear from them. I think the most common thing and what really motivates me to help students in this area is when they say, like, I thought I was going to do so much better. Like, I studied for so long, or I just, I figured I'd get something in the B range and I got a C minus or whatever. And there's sort of this disconnect between what they feel like they're doing or where they should be and where they're actually landing. And so that leads to a bunch of these things too. So that's a pretty common student that we see. And the other thing I'm going to kind of highlight as I talk tonight, or probably reference a lot, is just college students, like the jump to college and how things change and sort of how students need to make adjustments. Um, because that's a big switch, and things have to change, especially in the study um, department. Okay, so very briefly, what is learning? Um, Quite simply, learning is I am taking in information, I am storing it in my long-term memory, and then I am able to access or pull out that information and use it when I need to. For a student, that's most commonly like a test, a quiz, I don't know, an in-class essay, whatever it is. Um, That's all it is, though. And that's how I explain it to students is like, we are trying to get this information into your long-term memory, get it to stay there, and then have you be able to use it. Um, it's a fairly simple concept. Most students will usually come back at me with like, well, long-term memory, like I thought that was like my Disney World trip when I was 6. That's like a memory I have. And I'm like, well, yeah, it's the same thing. We're obviously working with pieces of information now. We're not working with like an actual experience, but it is the same thing. And so these things I'm talking about tonight, um, one of the goals is, well, how do I get that information to really stick? How do I get it to really go in and then stick and stay for a long time? I often tell college students, especially because, yeah, I know high schools get final exams, but it's a little bit of a mixed bag these days. But really, like the things they're learning in mid-September, they need to know in mid-December. Like these things really need to stick. And so when I'm talking about long-term memory, something I might reference a couple times tonight is the high school mode. And I often find that when students start moving out of the high school mode, they usually have more success academically. And the high school mode of getting ready for an exam or a test is like, oh, it's Wednesday night. I have an AP US history test tomorrow on Thursday. I'm just, Wednesday late night, I'm just going to kind of look through the study guide and, smash all this information into my head. Um, and then they can kind of go in the next day and they usually do okay on the test. That's sort of the high school mode of operating. And a lot of students are able to get away with that and be totally fine and get A's and B's. What that really is doing is not putting information into their long-term memory. That's really putting information into more of their working memory, which is how we're working with it. It's sort of the mechanism where we're working with information in real time. So typically what happens is they might be able to hold that information for a day or two. They do fine on the test, but then like a bunch of it starts kind of steeping away and kind of fading and not staying in their long-term memory. And so they didn't really truly learn it. They just kind of like did enough to get through a test. And when students get to college, especially, but even like the AP classes in high school and things like that, like hopefully they're starting to incorporate some of these better habits we're going to talk about tonight. All right. So, number one, mistake number one, rereading. Um, so there's the survey, or this study was done. I have to look it back up, but a survey was given to college students, and it was like 10 possible study strategies that students could use. And it asked them to fill out which one do they use the most. And the most selected strategy was rereading. And then they studied the strategies and determined, well, which of these are the most effective, which are these the least effective. And sure enough, rereading came out as the least effective study strategy. So it was most used, least effective. Um, the very first thing that students can start to incorporate in all of their studying is retrieval. Now, what is retrieval? Retrieval is quizzing themselves. When I do this workshop with students, I'm like, if you get nothing out of this, come away from this and know you need to use retrieval as you're studying. Um, we call this sort of circular thing here just the study cycle. It's very straightforward. It's literally two steps over and over and over, but it's I need to learn the information. I need to encode the information. The information is going in for the first time. Maybe I'm sitting in class taking notes. Maybe I'm reviewing a textbook. Maybe I'm doing a worksheet, whatever. I'm learning this information. Um, Immediately, what I need to do is do some sort of retrieval practice. I need to essentially find a way to quiz myself on the information. I will determine what I do know and I don't know. And if there are things that I don't know, which of course there will be, I need to encode in a new way. I need to encode in a new way so that I'm learning the information in a second way and I'm back into retrieval. This is very simple, the concept of quizzing oneself. However, I don't see it used that much. Um, by a lot of students. They just don't know that's how I get it done. They reread their study guide, they reread their lecture slides, they reread their textbook. And so what happens when students reread, and this is from that study, is like confidence goes sky high. Like I'm rereading, my confidence for this test is going sky high. Um, and then the scores actually don't match that. And when students use retrieval as a study strategy, the confidence actually goes low because it's tough. You're like figuring out the things you don't know and you're having to work harder at them. Um, but the scores go higher. And so what I see and hear from students is, oh yeah, I have a test that covers chapters 3 to 8. And so I just read chapters 3 and 4, and I know that information now. Check that off my list. 3 and 4 are done. And what I'll often say to them is like, well, do you? Like, how do you know that? Like, the only way that you can truly know something is if you can get asked a question about it and you can answer it with zero prompting, I'll add in at the end there. But you just have to get asked a question and know the answer. That's it. And that also will give students good feedback on like, am I ready for this test? Which I find is a question a lot of students have rolling around in their head of like, when can I stop studying? When am I good? Um, well, you're good when you can get asked the questions and answer them. Um, so when students start to incorporate retrieval, they're going to see these pretty big jumps in their studying. Um, and of course, everything I'm talking about too, there's resources online. There's good YouTube videos that can walk through students how to walk students through how to do this. But then at the end of the day, they really need to just kind of like practice and do it and kind of get used to using it. One other thing I'll add about this is a lot of students use Quizlet. Um, and when they use Quizlet or another study app or platform, they have a lot of choices of like little games and quizzes and things that they can do on those apps. Um, I don't even like most of those because I don't feel like they're actually pure retrieval. A lot of times students will play a game where they're like clicking from choices or matching, or it generates multiple choice questions, but they're like not good multiple choice questions because they're just generating responses from other note cards they've made in Quizlet and things like that. Like none of those things are actually retrieval because they're just process of elimination. Again, they're getting away from the sort of simplicity of getting asked a question and knowing it with no prompting. Um, so that really has to be at the core of what students are doing. That is like the foundational piece. The second thing is another foundational piece. And so this is more into the timing. There's a concept, the concept I use at least is spaced repetition learning. There's a million other sort of very similar synonym type descriptions of what I'm going to say here, but I call it spaced repetition learning. That's what the learning scientists call it. Um, and that simply says that the more spaced out our learning is, and the more repetition we get with the same material, um, the better we'll learn it. Very simply put. So if a test is coming up and it's 8 days out, and then a student has to use those 8 days to prepare, a good question to ask themselves is, well, how am I going to use these 8 days? How am I going to spread out my learning so I'm revisiting the same material multiple times over those 8 days? I think the most basic version of this, if I gave the most basic version of retrieval, it is flashcards, old school, real flashcards. If I gave the most basic version of spaced repetition learning, it is, um, like Spanish vocab words. The kids in high school and they're like, you know what I need to do? 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I need to do my Spanish vocab words for 7 minutes. And I'm just going through my flashcards. Um, that works. And so I always think that this page, like I talk to college students, high school students, parents, like everyone's kind of always has the same reaction, which is like, well, yeah, we all like know that. Like, even if we think back to when we were students, we probably, started a semester and we're like, here's what I need to do. I need to review for this class 3 times a week and go through the study lectures or do study strategy or the lectures and go through, my notes and things like that. This is all about the execution. Like it takes planning, it takes consistency, it takes discipline, it takes some hard work. But students will instantly make a big jump if they're able to do this. So if we take, all right, retrieval, and now I'm combining that with the right timing, that alone is going to be so effective for students. And I'm always realistic, like students have to be realistic. So when I look at the strategies of spaced repetition learning, for instance, and I work with students at Ivy League schools and in engineering programs and in really difficult courses, this is applicable to the courses it makes sense for. I also don't want students to come away from this and say, okay, I need to do this in every class, because they actually probably don't. There's probably classes where this doesn't make sense or it's just not necessary and it's not a good use of their time. But I usually like to tell students, hey, let's target your 2, 3 toughest classes and then let's put in a system for this and really figure out how are you going to space it out and what are the strategies you're going to use. And the thing that I like to challenge students with, and I think this is a sort of a good contextual way to look at it, is um, there's sort of two different ways to view this. One is the example I gave, but it's like test is coming up 7, 8 days out. Like, what am I doing for those 7 or 8 days? The more ideal way and the better way to look at it is, I'll call it like a test window or a unit test. But like, what am I doing over the course of that entire time between tests, right? Like college students right now, um, school started on September 2nd and their first midterm in chemistry is October 11th. What are you doing in that 6 week stretch, right? What is the spaced repetition learning that you're incorporating? Because when they can start to get that down from the beginning, it's just really effective. And then even when you get to that second window of, okay, test is a week away, they're just in way better shape. Like it doesn't need to be as time consuming as it would have been. So those are kind of like, again, two core foundational pieces. Number three is just poor prioritization. Um, we find this a lot where students, a response I'll get sometimes that I hear from students when I meet them is, yeah, a lot of times with tests, I feel like I study so hard and then I take the test and it's the wrong stuff. Um, and it sounds like a simple issue to course correct, but I always caution parents to think, well, this actually, if a student is struggling with this, it does mean it's difficult for them. It means that maybe they're zoning out a lot in class, so they're not maybe on target as much, or following along on the course website is difficult for them, um, or they're just misprioritizing. And so what I find is that a couple things can happen. Number one, they can spend a lot of time on the wrong stuff. Number two is they just aren't even sure what materials to study, so they're just kind of randomly choosing. Or a big one is just not getting a lot of return on investment for their time and effort. Um, they are spending hours and hours on something. The way that they come up with an idea to study, just isn't producing a lot of results. For example, like if I work with a student and they're like, yeah, we had these 15 quizzes that the test is going to cover, and I'll review them all. Each one's going to take me about an hour to review. And um, That's 15 hours right there just on like quizzes. And they're like, oh yeah, and like, 35% of the questions are coming from the quizzes. Right away, I'm thinking like there has to be a better way to do this. This can't be the answer. Like it can't be 15%, um 15, I'm sorry, it can't be 15 hours for like 30 to 40% of the content on the test. Like that's just not realistic. You can't study that way. So I do find students struggle with that. Some quick solutions. Again, these things might be difficult for some kids, but like college, go to office hours, talk to the TA, email a professor, go in high school, go talk to your teacher at lunch, study with somebody else who's going to guide maybe what you're doing and or even give you feedback like, no, 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 we're not doing that. Like there are kind of some easy solutions, I'll say, but for the kids who are struggling with this, they're not going to be easy solutions. And so they do need intervention and help. Um, but I'm going to move on from that one. I feel like that's pretty specific to a certain type of student sometimes. Um, okay, so this is going to be a big one. The mistake is the memorization loop. I find that students, um, they that's what they get stuck in is the memorization loop. They're like, oh, and now I'm learning this concept, and now I know that these two words equal these 26 words. All right, got it. Next thing, these 5 words equal these 32 words. Got it. Next thing. And they just sort of work in this memorization loop. Now, what that does is it really um they're doing good stuff. I don't want to take away from that. Like students are doing good stuff, but a lot of times they're missing the broader context. They're missing how can I apply this to other situations? They're not understanding maybe the meaning of what they're learning. It's very narrow. Um, And so it doesn't always translate well to understanding the content and doing well when assessed. Um, Not to mention, it takes a lot of brain power when you get into classes, especially in college, where it's like, okay, maybe that AP psychology course that I took in high school over the course of a year, that's now in 3.5 months and is probably actually even covering more content than my AP US or AP psychology class did in high school. Like, we're getting way more content in a shorter amount of time. Sometimes it just becomes almost unreasonable to just keep cramming these like wordy definitions into your brain. Um, so how do we work through that? Well, when I was a kid, I always say this to students, and then they're like, no, I've never heard that. When I was a kid, I feel like I always would roll my eyes and hear, you need to make a connection to what you're learning. You need to create an association to what you're learning. 100% true. So me rolling my eyes as a kid at whoever it was, like that's actually completely true and backed by science. The words that I like to use, and I've never seen these anywhere else, are manipulate the information, right? And it kind of goes back to the study cycle of like, I'm encoding this way, I'm retrieving. I'm encoding this way, a new way, a second way, I'm retrieving again. When we're encoding, um, students need to manipulate the information. They need to do something with it, mold it, make it their own, come up with something that is going to help them learn it. Um, and so I'm going to talk about 3 ways to do that to get out of the memorization loop. And these are 3 simple ways. And I should have started tonight by saying everything I'm talking about could literally be like an entire course in college for a whole semester. So I'm giving the very quick versions of everything here tonight. But the 3 I'm going to talk about are visuals, examples, and elaboration questions. And it's all about how am I manipulating information? How am I making connections? And ultimately, going back to the start, it's, well, how am I making this information stick? How am I making the learning easier? And how am I making the information stay in my long-term memory for longer too? So I can access it when I need it. So um, we'll use this term, cognitive dissonance, which is a pretty basic psychology term. Any kid in a high school or even like a college psych, I'm sorry, a college psych class or a high school psych class is going to have this term. So here's what happens. I'm going to add some more information to the slide. Students get the definition and they say, okay, great. The psychological discomfort. Maybe this is out of a textbook, maybe it's on a slide, whatever, but this is what they get. The psychological discomfort experienced when a person holds 2 or more conflicting beliefs, values, or attitudes, or when their actions contradict their beliefs. Oh my gosh, that's a long definition. Now I need to practice it until I have it memorized, right? Well, that's not going to get me much. Like this, the definition's fine. It's not that informative. I don't know if I'd be able to use it if I was given a case study. I don't know if I'd be able to use it if I was writing an essay. Um, and so if we manipulate it, if we make a connection to what we're learning, it is going to be much easier to learn. So I always use the same example. I did not create cognitive dissonance out of thin air just for tonight. And the example I use is, and imagine if you're a high school kid, because that's usually who I'm talking to, or a college student. I say, okay, if you really dislike broccoli and you go to your best friend's house and their mom serves you broccoli, what are you going to do? And every kid I've ever worked with, except one, has said, well, I'm going to eat the broccoli, or I'm going to like eat some of it and spread it out, but I'm going to eat the broccoli. I'm going to put up a good show. And I said, of course you are. And that there is cognitive dissonance, right? So that is how I have manipulated the information. I've used an example. Um, and it's that simple. So when I go into to practice my retrieval, right, that hopefully I'm doing over time. But when I'm doing my retrieval, and now I'm working on the word, maybe let's just say it is a flashcard, and I'm working on the word cognitive dissonance. Um, I don't want to jump to that definition. Sorry, I'm pointing at my monitor over here. That's where the words are, but I don't want to jump to the definition of this long wordy thing because I don't even need to know those words. What I need to do is automatically make that connection and say cognitive dissonance. Oh yeah, that's the broccoli story. I understand what this means. It's a disconnect between, thoughts and actions. Um, and that's it, right? So that's going to stick with me. That's going to give me this sort of pairing, and it's going to stay with me for a long time. And so I even joke because I do a lot of these workshops with I do a lot of study workshops with students who are about to go to college in the summer before they go to college. And especially if I see them in person here in Madison, I always say to them, if I run into you at Target over winter break, I know we've only spent about 45 seconds on this cognitive dissonance term that you had never heard of 45 seconds ago. But like, if I run into you at Target, I'm going to ask you, what does cognitive dissonance mean? And I guarantee you're going to give me the broccoli story. And I say it sort of tongue in cheek, but that actually is the like concept behind this is these things will stick. And I actually do believe the student will, and maybe I guess I'm not seeing anyone's face tonight, but if I bumped into somebody, I would in 3 months, I would say the same thing. I'd be like, hey, you remember cognitive dissonance? Because it works. And so that is really what students need to do. I often will encourage them to like there's a few rules I'll say of examples. I'm about to go through visuals real quick, but it's be fast, do the work fast. Like they have to practice it. They have to kind of train their brain to think this way of how am I molding this? How am I manipulating this to make it work for me? I need to do it quickly. Tap into their involuntary thoughts. Odds are if they're learning something and it's the first thing they think of is some example, they're probably going to think of that the next time. Use that example. They don't need to be perfect. It does not need to be this like apples to apples perfect thing. It just needs to be something that works. Um, and so students need to practice it. They just need to practice. Oh, I'm studying for this exam. I have my biology exam. I work with students at UW Madison in chemistry 103. And for a lot of the new terms and concepts and different elements and things that they have to learn that are pretty complex, they need to do this. So that's examples. Now, with visuals, it is the same concept. So I don't need to talk about it very long, except we're replacing an example. And I should have mentioned when students make up examples, it's like a movie, a TV show, a weird cousin, a thing they did when they were 5 on vacation, something from history, politics. Like it doesn't matter what the example is, it can be anything. I've had students who are like, I have only sports examples. This is Tom Brady. That's LeBron James, whatever. It's all good. It can be goofy. It can be weird. It doesn't need to make sense only to them. That is what it's all about is helping them make those connections and hold that information in their long-term memory and make it easier for them. So with a visual, it's the same deal, but now we're using a visual. So when I do this with students, a common example I use, and I do not have a picture of it, is like a bull market and a bear market. We're learning those things. It's a basic concept. And I will usually draw the same picture, which is like a like Michael Jordan Jumpman logo because I grew up in Chicago in the 90s and watched Michael Jordan every night. And so, um, my picture is Michael Jordan going up for a dunk, which is like a bull market's going up. Again, when I'm doing retrieval, when I see bull market every single time for the rest of my life, pretty much, I want to think of that visual. I don't need to think of the textbook definition of it. I need to think of what is the concept and then how can I use it. And of course, I'm doing these with pretty basic examples, um, but that's okay too because it works for complex things as well. Um, so that's kind of the association with visuals. I can see it's about 6:30, so I'm probably going to go about 5 minutes over, I would say. I'm running a little behind here. Um, and then the last one, just for these basic study strategies that are going to help students, is elaboration. So it's elaboration is pretty straightforward. I think the most common way students use it is like, I'm going to make my own study guide, um, but it's really in the details and how am I asking myself questions that force me to further elaborate, um, create connections, and provide more details. So, what I have found is when students, let's say they're in a US, this is a US history example, the 1960 presidential election was John F. Kennedy and Nixon. And what I'll find is students are studying this concept and they'll say, okay, who were the candidates? What parties were they in? Who won? How many electoral college votes? I don't know why I'm trying to sound like less exciting, like there's something wrong with these questions, but it just doesn't get to the meaning of anything. There's no context to it. It's like the basics. So it's factoids. That's what it is. It's factoids. It's like an A to B thing. There's not much to it. And so if students really want to learn a concept or, you know, in this case, a historical event in depth, then they can ask themselves questions that force them to elaborate. So I put three examples on here that I'm sure everyone's read while I'm talking. But clearly, if I can answer question number two, what were three main factors that led to Kennedy's win? Then I have a much better understanding of the 1960 presidential election than if I can just answer a question of like, who won the debate? Um, and so even a good, one that's not on the slide, but a good one for things like this are even opinion questions. Like, who would I have voted for in the 1960 election and why? Give three reasons. Well, if I come up with that question and then I can answer it, and to answer it, I'd have to talk in depth of, okay, I would vote for Kennedy because I liked his policy on XYZ. All of a sudden, I have a better understanding of the election. These things lend themselves better to history classes, to English classes. Certainly, like I have a lot of students that use elaboration questions when they're reading books in English because they may not get as maybe detailed of a study guide or something like that, or as much direction as they're heading into a test where they really have to think of things on their own. I mean, this study strategy in particular, I used to always say it's the hardest one. Um, However, with the invention of with the AI becoming more popular, it's actually become quite easy. You almost can even take some of the brain power of your own, creating the questions out of it. And so it actually can be pretty easy. But it all has the same sort of foundational pieces as those other strategies and everything we've been talking about tonight, which is retrieval, you know, making connections, manipulating the information in the ways you need to learn it. Okay. And then my number five, I almost made it as more of a summary of everything we've talked about. Um, but it really is like missing some things. It's like I'm leaving a couple things out. There's always every class is always going to look a little different in terms of what are the steps you have to take to be successful in this class. However, it still usually is kind of some of the basics of note taking. I need to have ongoing study strategies. I need to have um, some when I'm reviewing notes and slides, like I need to have like how am I incorporating examples? How am I incorporating visuals? How am I incorporating elaboration questions? A lot of times, um, our work with college students and high school students, but I find this more relevant in college is like, especially around their notes, where it's like I take my rough draft of notes in class, but then I have my final draft of notes that I create after class. Um, and now I'm incorporating all these study strategies and I'm really like transferring it. I'm making some cuts on what I need to prioritize. And as I'm writing the new information, I'm including visuals, I'm including examples, I'm really thinking through this information. And so having ongoing strategies like that, as those things, as you start cutting all these things and they aren't happening, and then you try to cram at the very end, kind of go high school mode on a test, it's really hard. And so, um, you know, students can make a big difference. They can really, I find with some ads that do take some discipline, they do take some effort. They can really kind of make a big difference here with the way that they're studying, and just going through their, maybe it's their more difficult classes, maybe it's every class. But certainly these are some of the foundational pieces that we find that really help students as they start to incorporate them more and practice them more. So my hope for these things is always that everyone who's here at least comes away with one thing that they learned, or they can talk to their student about, or they're going to think further about tonight. As I mentioned, if you really want to go with a much, much more of a deep dive than I gave tonight, like learningscientist.org is a great resource and a good way to kind of look at some of these things or listen to some videos, podcasts, etc. Um, I'm more than happy to answer any questions if anyone wants to throw anything into the chat. That's my contact. If somebody wants to get a hold of me and just has questions or wants to send me an email with a question, whatever, feel free to shoot me a message or give me a call. But I appreciate everyone. I know like 35 minutes on a weeknight is not easy. So I appreciate everyone joining tonight and spending some time with me. I'll hang out here for like another minute or so before I close the call if I'm not getting any questions. Thanks for coming.